Demanding answers. Congressional Democrats want to know more about the U.S. drone strike that killed one of Iran's top military leaders. We have a report and reaction, including what Pope Francis is saying about the situation. Eye on Venezuela, an update on the political upheaval in the majority Catholic country. And Feast of the Epiphany. The Holy Father ends the Christmas season with a message about serving others. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 6th, 2020. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Mark Irons. President Donald Trump promises to use military force if Iran targets Americans or U.S. assets. Iran has vowed retaliation following last week's U.S. airstrike that killed a top Iranian official. Now President Trump says he doesn't need approval from Congress to strike if Iran follows through with threats. Iranians fill their streets today during the funeral service for Qasem Soleimani. The country's top general was killed at Iraq's Baghdad airport days ago by a U.S. drone strike.
He was plotting attacks against Americans, but now we've ensured that his atrocities have been stopped for good. They are stopped for good.
Iran has promised to strike back. This military official says America should accept appropriate reactions to their actions. But President Trump is trying to stamp out the threats and says the U.S. is eyeing 52 Iranian sites, tweeting some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture. And those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats. Today, the White House defending the president's threat to target Iran's cultural sites, an action considered a war crime by the 1954 Hague Convention.
I think that Iran has many strategic military sites that you may cite are also cultural sites.
Over the weekend, thousands of U.S. troops began deploying for the Middle East. At the same time, Iraq has called for the expulsion of U.S. military from its soil as U.S. tension with Iran heats up. Congress has the sole power to declare war, and Democrats are proposing resolutions to limit the president's military action. But President Trump is putting Congress on notice by tweet, writing, "These media posts will serve as notification to the United States Congress that should Iran strike any U.S. person or target, the United States will quickly and fully strike back, and perhaps in a disproportionate manner." Two top Senate Democrats want President Trump to immediately declassify his reasoning for the Iran strike. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Robert Menendez of New Jersey say there's no legitimate justification for keeping the information from the public. Catholic news agency's Matt Hadro reports from Capitol Hill.
Good evening, Mark. The senators wrote a joint letter to the president today. They say the White House's classified notification sent to Congress late Saturday under the War Powers Act was both insufficient and inappropriate. It is critical that national security matters of such import be shared with the American people in a timely manner. A brief but critical letter from two Senate Democrats to President Trump. They object to the president's decision to strike in Iraq without advance notice to lawmakers, and they want the notification Congress received late Saturday to be declassified in full.
The power to make war resides in the Congress. The founders believe that there needed to be a check on executive power. And we know when we go into a conflict anywhere in the world in the past, we're always stronger when we are united.
Yes, sir.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced last night, this week, the House will introduce and vote on a war powers resolution to limit the president's military actions regarding Iran. A similar resolution is being introduced in the Senate. On the campaign trail, Senator Bernie Sanders points out he voted against the Iraq War in 2002. And he calls the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani an assassination.
This is a dangerous escalation that brings us closer to another disastrous war in the Middle East, which could cost countless lives and trillions more dollars.
But Republican Ted Cruz is rounding up support for a Senate resolution to applaud the president's action. It honors, quote, the members of the military and intelligence community who carried out the mission that killed Qasem Soleimani. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, accuses Democrats of defending Soleimani and attacking Trump. President Trump did meet the 48-hour deadline under the War Powers Act to notify Congress, even though the document is classified. The administration is expected to brief lawmakers this week. At the Capitol, Matt Hadro, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining us now for more analysis is Steve Yates, the CEO of DC International Advisory and a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Steve, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Was this the right move by President Trump?
I believe it was. In many ways, it was a little bit late in the sense that Iran has been pushing the envelope for decades. And multiple presidents of both parties have taken a softer approach in terms of how to respond. And so we've accultured the Iranian theocratic regime into thinking that it can get away with almost anything. And with the prospect of them maiming more American service members in Iraq, attacking U.S. sovereign territory and our embassy with impunity was just something that President Trump was not going to allow to go happen. Mm-hmm. And he's also struggling with how do you push back without engaging in another Iraq-style war. And so this strike hard and maximum pressure combo, I think, is the right approach.
Democrats have been critical of this decision. They say it could lead to war with Iran. Do you think this will lead to a wider conflict?
Well, that's largely in the hands of the Iranians. Notice what the president said in his tweet, and I think it was carefully chosen language, contrary to what some might believe, where he's saying, we want no more threats. How do you get them to stop making the threats? They're the ones that upped the ante. They're the ones that were destabilizing Iraq. They were organizing the protests against the embassy. And so he's saying, no threats, no attacks. But if you keep attacking us, I'm going to strike back hard. And that does not require authorization from Congress. You go back multiple decades that has not required notification to Congress for that kind of a tactical response.
We're also hearing from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who has said European countries haven't been as helpful as he wishes they could be. What do you think this means? What does he mean by that? And what impact will this decision have on U.S. relations with our allies?
Well, they've been a work in progress through the administration. In some ways, I think it's been an important adjustment because we've allowed them to have the benefit of economic engagement with our enemies while we foot the bill for their defense against those enemies. And so this is another bone of contention. The Iranians have engaged in a lot of business with European powers, especially Germany and some others, and they have undermined sanctions and they've pulled back on the pressures that are necessary to get Iran to take the right choices.
Iran has vowed to retaliate. It said it will no longer abide by those key remaining components on enrichment under the Iran nuclear deal. How significant is that, and what else do you expect to see from Iran?
If we believed that they were ever going to honor the agreement, one might lament that was going by the wayside. But there's evidence all along the way that they were never going to abide by its terms, and they're determined to acquire the weapon. They look at the Libya model that John Bolton talked about as the one thing never to do. Don't give up your ultimate deterrent. And so I don't think it was ever going to work. I think we're looking at occasional flare-ups from Iran in the region, but I think the right response by the president or any president is if someone's going to threaten us on our homeland or our sovereign territory abroad, then we have to have force to push them back from considering doing so.
Okay, Steve Yates, CEO of DC International Advisory and a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Pope Francis appeals for dialogue and self-control amid what he calls the terrible air of tension.
La guerra porta solo morte e distruzione.
At Sunday's gathering, the Holy Father said war brings only death and destruction. He calls upon all parties to keep the flame of dialogue and self-control to prevent hostility. The Pope's message comes right after the U.S. killed Iran's top general due to active plots to attack American diplomats. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Alan Holdren joins us from St. Peter's Square. Alan, what is the Vatican's response to what is happening with the U.S. and Iran, and will it jeopardize any plans the Pope may have to visit the Middle East?
Well, Mark, we haven't heard anything explicitly from the Holy Father about the U.S.-Iran tensions, besides what he said at the Angelus, where he didn't specifically refer to the situation between U.S. and Iran, just to tension around the world today. He did tweet that we must all believe that we need peace, that all people need peace as much as we do. Obviously also in reference to these tensions. What I did do today was spoke to the Pope's top emissary, top diplomat to Iran. That's the Apostolic Nuncio. His name is Archbishop Leo Boccardi. He told me that he is monitoring the situation there. He's referring all of that information back to the Secretariat of State of the Vatican. We'd expect that all that information trickles to the Pope in a very concentrated form. Pope was very busy today, it being the Epiphany here in Italy and in the Vatican, and so he celebrated a major mass, and the diplomat there, Archbishop Boccardi, said that he hadn't spoken directly with the Pope yet, but he did say that, judging from this conflict, that it would not be a good idea for the Pope to visit while the region is still unstable, so he does not expect that visit to take place this year.
And what more can you tell us about the reaction on the ground in Iran?
Well, Archbishop Boccardi told me that there are these major manifestations, these ceremonies for the funeral of the general and others killed in the attack going on in the streets of Iran today in different cities. Checking the local live transmissions, it's a mass manifestation of humanity, and they're not happy. You see images of the general there on the streets, and all of that information, again, being monitored by the Holy See. And for the small Christian presence there, Archbishop Boccardi said that the situation is the same as the general population situation of tension.
In transitioning to Iraq, Christians make up a very small population in that country. How will this affect their lives in Iraq?
That's right, Mark. The population of Christians there is small. It's bigger than what's in Iran. It's about 250,000 individuals. That's down by 80% of what the population of Catholics was in Iraq 10 years ago, at more than 1.2 million. It's a difficult situation for them. Patriarch Louis Sacco, who's the head of the Chaldean Catholics of Iraq and a cardinal of the Catholic Church, I spoke with him today over the phone. He said that they're caught in the middle of this crossfire and all this unrest, this continuing conflict that's gone on for years. He said that if this tension today turns into another war, it will mean the end of Christians in Iraq. Mark?
Okay, Alan Holdren, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief, thank you for this update.
Thank you, Mark.
Former Democratic presidential hopeful Julian Castro has announced which candidate he is endorsing. Castro says he is supporting Elizabeth Warren. He made the announcement today on social media. Castro says the Massachusetts senator is the one candidate who's unafraid to fight to make sure America's promise will be there for everyone. The two are expected to appear at a campaign event together tomorrow night. Turkey's president says his country has deployed soldiers to Libya. Recep Erdogan says the troops will support the United Nations recognized government in Tripoli. Istanbul last month had agreed to send military experts and weapons. The fighting has threatened to plunge the country into violent chaos. And in Hong Kong, China has appointed a new top official to the former British territory. In his first public comments, he says he has full confidence in the city's stability and long-term prosperity. Hong Kong has been the site of 8 months of pro-democracy protest. Opposition leader Juan Guaido was re-elected last night as president of the Congress in Venezuela. But earlier in the day, he had been barred from entering the legislative palace. It was an attempt by the socialist government to wipe out the final bits of resistance. The United States and other nations condemned the move. In Nicaragua, a cardinal says the ongoing political tensions in that country can only be solved by dialogue and accepting differences. Cardinal Leopoldo Brenes says peace is achieved only by a change in the human heart. More than 300 people have been killed in protest against President Daniel Ortega's government that began last year. Officials in Australia say they are willing to pay whatever it takes to help communities recover from devastating wildfires. Those affected say the situation has been unbelievably difficult.
The remainder of what was a burning hell yesterday. I don't know what to say about it. Such a beautiful town, you know, great atmosphere, the most lovely people you could ask for. And for what's happened to have happened, it's devastating.
Residents of the New South Wales town of Bartlow are assessing the damage. The wildfires have destroyed an area roughly double the size of the state of Maryland. Around 24 people have been killed and 2,000 homes have been destroyed. Coming up, analysis of a report on violence against Christians in Nigeria. African church leaders are responding to the reported December 26th execution of 11 Nigerian Christians by a terrorist group affiliated with the Islamic State. In a tweet, Cardinal Robert Serra, prefect of the Vatican's Congregation for Divine Worship and Sacraments, calls those killed martyrs, saying in part the murderers are, quote, a reminder of how many of my African brothers in Christ live faith at the risk of their own lives. Joining us now via Skype from Nairobi, Kenya, is Father Don Bosco Anyala, the editor-in-chief of ACI Africa. Father Don, welcome back. Give us a sense of what life is like for Christians in Nigeria. How have these killings heightened their concerns?
These killings have heightened the concerns of Christians in the West African country of Nigeria, where church leaders that you have spoken to as ACI Africa have said that these concerns are dating back to many years. It is difficult, for example, for church leaders to buy land and build churches in various parts of Nigeria, especially the northern part of Nigeria. It is difficult for Christians to have programs on radio and television. It's difficult for Christians to teach Christianity in the schools where children go. It's difficult to have a chaplain in a university within Nigeria. And these discriminations against Christians seem to also go to job opportunities within the government. So the killings that happened on Christmas Day seem to reinforce the concerns that Christians have had as stated to us by church leaders in Nigeria.
What has the Nigerian government done so far to protect Christians in the country?
Well, the president of Nigeria condemned the attack and the murder of the Christians, but that seems not enough. At least those we've talked to as church leaders say that the government is not doing enough. It should be proactive. It shouldn't wait for attacks to be made, murders to be committed for them to come up and condemn. They should do preventive actions more than waiting until actions happen.
Mm-hmm. And the U.S. State Department has added Nigeria to its list of countries of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act. What else can be done to help?
I think that's a good move on the part of the international community, but more could be done towards preventing insurgents infiltrating into the country. One church leader told us that there seems to be a free border entry of other citizens from other countries into Nigeria. So perhaps the government can go into making the border, having visas and having people pass through vetting before they are allowed into the West African country. Although this is part of a wider problem in the West African region, in the Sahel region.
Okay, Father Don Bosco Anyala, editor-in-chief of ACI Africa. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you, too.
Up next, we hear about a case in Texas on the battle to keep an infant on life support. And Pope Francis weighs in on the damages of consumerism. A Texas appeals court has agreed to delay a judge's ruling that would have allowed a hospital to end life-sustaining treatment for an 11-month-old girl. The move is the latest development in a battle between Tinslee Lewis's family, who wishes to continue treatment, and hospital doctors who have testified the little girl is in pain. They say treatment is no longer benefiting her. Tinslee, who has been on a ventilator since early July, has a rare heart defect and suffers from chronic lung disease and severe chronic high blood pressure. Joining me now to talk more about this case is Kimberlyn Schwartz, Director of Media and Communications for Texas Right to Life. She joins us via Skype from Dallas. Kimberlyn, welcome to the show. Your organization has been advocating for Tinslee and her family. Tell us a little bit about the so-called 10-day rule doctors were invoking to try to remove Tinslee from life support.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. The 10-day rule basically forces everyday Texans to race against the clock to save their loved ones. This is a situation that no Texan ever wants to be in. Not only do they have a loved one who is sick in a hospital, but now they have basically a death panel making these decisions for them instead. Trinity Lewis, baby Tinslee's mother, found herself in this situation in October when the hospital gave her a letter saying that we're going to pull the plug on your daughter in 10 days. Luckily, the day before the hospital was set to pull the plug, Trinity called Texas Right to Life's patient advocacy team for help, and that team was able to win a temporary restraining order protecting her just within 30 hours of getting the call.
And where do things stand now in the search to find a new facility willing to care for Tinslee?
The search is always ongoing. Now, we've been calling different doctors and hospitals since we got this case in November, but what we realized once we started getting involved was that the records that the hospital was sending to these different transfer facilities were actually outdated. They were 3 months old. So trying to piece together what's missing so we can get these alternate facilities the accurate information has been an uphill battle. And whenever you consider that Texas law expects you to cram this entire process in just a 10-day window, it makes the law even more barbaric.
Now, doctors say Tinslee is suffering. You've been in touch with Tinslee's mother, Trinity. How does she describe her daughter's condition? Is it different from what the doctors are saying?
It is different. Trinity is there in the hospital every single day, and she says that from her observations, she doesn't believe that Tinslee is in pain. Just last night, they were watching a show called Puppy Dog Pals, and whenever they had to turn off the show, then Tinslee started to get upset. So Trinity is there. She is the only one in the world who has Tinslee's best interests at heart more than anybody else. And so that's why it's so important that she be the one to make these decisions on Tinslee's life.
Understandably so, and as you say, her mom says she wants to be the one to make those decisions about her care. What rights do parents have in these situations? And now what are the next steps as far as legal steps in this case?
It's really tragic in Texas. If any patient, no matter if you're 99 or just a newborn baby, patients in Texas hospitals do not have the right to dictate their own care whenever it comes to life-sustaining treatment like a ventilator or dialysis. So any patient who is in a Texas hospital can be jeopardized by this. So we're asking Governor Greg Abbott to call a special session to end this 10-day rule. Tinslee has not been the last patient. Since her case has been in the media, we've had more calls to our office saying, this is happening to me right now. Will you please help? Wow. So that's hopefully one of the next steps is Governor Abbott will call a special session, but also we now wait for the appeal court to hear Tinslee's case, and we are praying for a good outcome in that.
It's an important case we'll continue to follow. Kimberlyn Schwartz, Director of Media and Communications for Texas Right to Life, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis warns the faithful about the dangers of consumerism and worshiping money.
Que la vita cristiana è una storia di amore con Dio.
At a Mass for the Feast of the Epiphany today at the Vatican, the Holy Father says Christian life is a love story with God. And if we lose our sense of worship, we will fall away from our relationship with Him. He also says devotion to God is a way to separate ourselves from addictions and useless actions that numb our mind and heart. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Mark Irons. An exciting day tomorrow as we welcome our new anchor to EWTN News Nightly. Be sure to tune in for that. Until then, good night and God bless.